can have this in market by end of quarter.
End of quarter?
Yep.
Well, there might be a few global requirements that you forgot to consider.
All of our data has to be stored on private clouds.
We can do that.
我们用的云供应商不在北美。
That's fine.
Our developers need to be able to use the tools that they already have.
You got it.
We have critical services on VMs.
Not a problem.
Not a problem.
We're building on a really flexible platform.
Like really flexible.
Okay then, let's get started.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are as you listen to us right now. I am Steve O'Grady. I'm the co-founder of RedMonk. RedMonk, if you are unfamiliar with us, is a developer-focused industry analyst firm, and I'm here today with Chuck from Red Hat. Chuck, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Chuck Svoboda. I am the Senior Director of Cloud Services Go-to-Market at Red Hat, helping our customers and Red Hat as a whole make a pivot towards cloud services.
Outstanding. And I think we'll kick off the discussion with what is, I'm sure, a controversial statement for some that you said a couple of times now, which is that developers don't care about containers or Kubernetes. Can you take that apart for us a little bit? What do you mean?
Yeah, although I think the Red Hat Container Police might pull me out of the room here in a second if I say too much. No, in all seriousness, so a bit of history about myself. So I'm a developer by trade, right? That's what I started out with years ago. Went to school for it. Worked in C, Java, .NET. It's funny being a big .NET guy even at Red Hat, right? And one of the things as a developer and a developer leader that I really abhorred is that having to worry about all those underlying technical details or implementation details and toiling through them. And where I think what happened in the market in the past few years is, and Red Hat is partly guilty for it, right? We just talk so much about the tech, like containers and Kube, as a kind of the end state, what a developer should be working with. And the reality of it is, a good developer, is the epitome of the 10,000 principle, which is maximizing work not done, if I may paraphrase. And man, I mean, the job of the developer is not to worry about writing Docker files or Kubernetes YAML. The job of the developer is to implement business logic and break the land speed record of getting to production so that whoever they're coding for can be, both first to market and best in market. So, that hook of saying that they don't care, developers actually do care about containers and Kube, but they care about enough in such a way that I want someone else to be accountable or responsible for that. I understand what it unlocks for me, but man, I really wish it was boring and it'd be hidden for me so I can focus on writing my good business code.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think, when we have the conversations, from a market standpoint here, with practitioners, all shapes and sizes, different industries and so on, really what we end up finding is that I think it's developers they care more about the container, right? Just because it's like, hey, how do I package up my app and make it easy to, if nothing else, sort of deploy to, from my, my machine to something else, right? Staging, test production, whatever it might be. But do they really want to deal with Kubernetes? Right. In most cases, no. Which brings us to sort of the next question or topic, I guess, which is sort of the developer experience associated with Kubernetes. And this has obviously evolved over time.
There is one? I didn't think there was a developer experience in Kubernetes.
Right. Well, I guess that's part of it in the sense that in the early days, this was quite clearly not a tool meant for, the developer. Right. Because, for folks, I'm sure most of the folks on the line understand the history here. But, for those of you who are a little new to the environment, where Kubernetes came from originally was that we had containers, which were, packaging up a pre-existing Linux technology, made it really, really easy, for developers to, basically encapsulate an app, something they needed to sort of distribute or use or whatever, including all the dependencies, everything you need, without the overhead of a VM, right? So you didn't have to wrap up the entire operating system. Everything goes along with that. So the popularity of containers with developers was through the roof. And what ended up happening as a consequence of that is that, sort of a bunch of folks looked around and said, all right, if developers are using these, we're going to end up using them in production. How does that work, right? What are we going to do? We need to run a bunch of these. How do we schedule them, orchestrate them, et cetera, et cetera. So Kubernetes was one of multiple projects, sort of intending to be that sort of solution. It clearly emerged as the victor. It is now essentially an industry default at this point. And anyway, so back to the beginning. Like in the early days, it was very much a tool meant for operators, admins, et cetera. Sort of intended to, for them to help manage, sort of the sea of containers in production. Very much not a developer tool. And arguably, at the Chuck's point, it still isn't. What we have seen, however, and we'll get to the managed services side of this in a little bit, are solutions that have emerged around it to abstract it, to make it easier to consume. So developers don't necessarily have to deal with all of the bells, whistles, dials, knobs, switches, et cetera. And, they can more or less get to the point where, okay, I have a container, I want to deploy the container, and great. Some other stuff happens. I don't necessarily need to worry about that. We're not quite to that level of simplicity yet, at least in most cases. But I'm curious, Chuck, from your standpoint, the conversations you're having at Red Hat, customers, developers, your own experience as a developer, like where do you see the developer experience at present?
Yeah, so I think if we back up a bit of history, if you look at containerization, right? Really, when we had to hand it to Big D Docker Inc. for really unlocking the power of containers. I mean, containers have been around. The classic example is it's like with BSD jails, I think, right? And what containers are basically taking advantage of Linux primitives. What Docker did was create an API around that, which is developers. We know how critical those are to our work. To make it ubiquitously easy to run, whatever the heck you wanted to, from whether it be a Spring Boot, cloud native app dev, or doing, put a database in it, which I don't necessarily wouldn't recommend on day one. Writing something in Golang, or even hosting a big honking monolith, but you want to benefit from the homogeny of the Docker API. And so that was great. You mentioned something earlier. It runs on my laptop, right? So it's easy to package. I can deploy it out. But the reality of it is, even with the API, if you think about the 4 levels of lock-in, proprietary versus open source data, which includes locality, sovereignty, gravity, the API and the configuration, what I think was kind of forgot is how important that configuration piece is. Namely, so I could build a container on my laptop right now and deploy it to Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS. It would fail if I was using a root user, or I did not take care of security context constraints for XE Linux and things like that, right? It would also fail in some cases. I just discovered the other day, I had an app that had the Log4j vulnerability in it. Because I was running advanced cluster security on one of my clusters, it blocked me from deploying it. Now I have that on my laptop, right? So I think we have to take a step back and understand that from a portability and homogeny perspective, there are definitely limits, right? So containers are enabling technology. Similarly, Kubernetes, an enabling technology, right? The Kubernetes API, or the Kubernetes, the founders of the project, Joe, Craig, and Brendan, it was never intended to be used as a platform for developers to consume directly, right? It was always intended to be a orchestration and management framework to control the lifecycle of, again, that tech called containers, for you to build a platform around. In a lot of cases, that would be like, Red Hat's core business is to build a platform around Kubernetes. Most of the customers, enterprise, Fortune, 500, whether it be automotive, telco, healthcare, et cetera, their job really isn't to be building a platform, because to build a platform, you got to resell it, right? Because that's the amount of investment it takes to make Kubernetes usable at scale is pretty high. So I think from that perspective, what we've really seen and matured over the years is that even though we've been saying this since the very beginning, that Kubernetes is a framework, a tool set for building platforms. You go to KubeCon, I've been going to KubeCon since it was a thing, and you hear all these stories about these, companies doing cool things with Kubernetes, but what they didn't tell you is all the, blood, sweat, tears, and eyeballs are left on the floor to get there. And at scale, it breaks, right? So we see a ton of developers. In a lot of cases, they're really not developers. They're actually what I call platform architects or DevOps engineers. Embrace containers and Kube. But then when you try to expose that raw to the breadth and depth of the 9 to 5 developer that makes it the bulk of an IT team, boy, there's a lot of retraining that has to happen, and a lot of process and controls around it. Containerization. You thought dealing with 70 VMs was hard. Try dealing with 7,000 containers and making sure that everything is safe and operating the same way, right? And right. So what you don't want to do is think that containers and Kube is like a silver bullet. You definitely don't want to just kind of let that open across your organization all willy-nilly, like else, and what I've experienced working with a lot of customers in the past few years is that when they do that, a lot of times they get bitten, right? It's good to have a structured turnkey application platform, just so happens to use container and Kube, that unlocks the power of tech like containers and Kube while hiding or reducing the complexity of the tech like containers and Kube.
Right. So, I think, so we've talked about sort of, some of the benefits and some of the gaps. I think it's worthwhile sort of assessing what developers want, right? And, there's a statement, that the common statement that developers want a platform to be boring, right? Oftentimes you hear the metaphor used, like, they talk about paved roads, right? Where it's like, hey, this is just there's a road that I stay on. I have guardrails. It's paved. It's very straightforward, and I don't have to sort of think about much, right? Versus, I don't know, off-roading or I guess hoofing it, sort of on your feet. What are your thoughts in terms of, the customers that you talk to and the either developers or admins that work for them? What are they looking for?
Yeah, so that's actually, you mentioned roads. So I'll go back to one of my, favorite quotes I like to quote, right? I'm not very smart. I just steal real good ideas from a bunch of other people and match them together. And there was this quote that was supposedly attributed to Henry Ford back in the day. It said, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? What the people were actually asking for was not a faster horse. They just want a better method, a faster method of conveyance, right? Of transit. But they're limited by the understanding of the environment that they're in and what they know and what their expectations are. So when a customer says, I want something, I approach them a bit with a challenger mentality, right? If a customer, if a developer says, I want containers, I want Kubernetes, even I want OpenShift, right? First thing it says, do you really want the tech, or is it that you want a better way to build, deploy, and manage applications at scale, safely, reliably, and we usually get to that root right there, right? And then, so from a developer standpoint, specifically, again, these are the 9 to 5 coders, the backbone of what it takes to get an application out, the backlog owners of items, and they're, what they care about more than anything else. And granted, I haven't been a hands-on keyboard developer for a few years, but I don't think it's changed too much. The biggest thing that would inspire me to slog through those long days and nights was to see my code in production, to see it being used, to see value coming from it.
Right.
And if I am distracted by things like containers and Kube and the configuration the same, or even going way back when I was thinking about this, like when I would build an application, I hated dealing with like session replication, distributed transactions, configuration management, HA, things like that. That wasn't business logic. That was all the stuff I had to do just to get at the prod. But the reality is that wasn't the actual application that the end users were touching. So right. Developers, what they really want is they want to see their application in production as quickly as possible, but safely and very reliably, right? Because they want as many people touching it as possible, and because that what makes them feel valuable.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And that brings us to sort of the next, I guess, topic of discussion, which is sort of buying usage preferences, right? So what do you see? I mean, we have our own thoughts on this at RedMonk, right? So what we see, for example, are a huge preference for self-service, a huge preference for things that are managed, right? Basically, I want to take this off my plate. The running the sort of management, in some cases, the abstraction of Kubernetes and put it on someone else's plate, sort of as it were. But what are the conversations you're having? What do you hear people looking for?
A lot of that. I think a lot of customers have realized that tech is hard, right? I think we're seeing another renaissance like we saw years ago, when customers started moving to AWS and Azure, and Google, Alibaba, and a lot of other clouds, right? Customers realized that it wasn't in their best interest to, rack, stack, cable, cool their own infrastructure, right? And then we went into this. I think we then rotated into like the PaaS stage, but that's old Heroku and Cloud Foundry world, right? And then through the limitations of those platforms, then there was a swing in the other direction to kind of like a CaaS, which was not opinionated enough to actually be productive. And now we're coming back towards, I think, the PaaS side of the house, where the customer just really wants to focus on the app and data. And so with that, specifically for Red Hat, our PaaS, and there's tons of arguments. I'm sure this is inflaming some people who are watching this of what a PaaS truly is, right? But if you think about, I look at Red Hat as a OpenShift, specifically as a PaaS. In other words, your entry point is your business code, not your runtimes or containers or anything else. The platform handles it.
Right.
Well, you can put that into your own data center, right? But if your data center, and a lot of them have 10 years of tech debt laden in it, it's really hard to take something that's cloudy like OpenShift and ram it in there. So we see, quite a few challenges with that, and our customers realize that. And when they're fighting their own data center, they're fighting their own infrastructure, they're fighting maybe the configuration they did in OpenShift that really, really kind of shot themselves in the foot. They're not focusing on applications, right? They're doing 24/7 operations instead of 9 to 5 innovation. What we're seeing from customers from a cloud services perspective, and this is why Red Hat is doing such a big push in that, is a lot of customers are, again, as I said, are sick and tired of running it. And so now we have options for them to say, hey, if you want us to manage everything below your application, we've got products for you. You can sleep better at night. You're going to put the risk onto Red Hat, backed by financially our SLAs to ensure that your platform is ready to go, right? But if you need to burst down from the cloud or run on, an edge device or even in your data center, we have a consistent experience through OpenShift in terms of you have a real good chance that what you run in the cloud is going to run everywhere else or on other clouds or whatever. What starts the foundation of RHEL, right? That's the container OS. Containers are just nothing but Linux primitives, remember? So the OS matters, right? Kubernetes is kind of utility now, but our kube is pretty rock solid. And then we put the abstractions on top, again, as I said, to unlock the power of the container kube and other things while hiding its complexity, right? And so that's the kind of full gamut. I think we're seeing a lot of customers understanding a lot more, wanting to have those conversations, wanting to raise their point of view above Kube's infra or anything like that, to again build, deploy, and manage applications, not just deploy containers.
Yeah, and I think we've gotten to this implicitly, I guess, as we're surfacing it explicitly. Which is the idea of basically third-party managed services, right? Sort of cloud and otherwise. Which is we at RedMonk, we've been arguing for this for a long time, right? Because our sort of our assertion, has been for well over a decade, is that sort of the upside for most organizations, not everyone, of course, but most organizations, the upside to you running your own physical infrastructure, the upside to you running, sort of the base primitives, sort of running these pieces is pretty limited. And obviously there are, we can all think of cases, sort of exception cases where, one factor or a combination of factors makes it imperative that you run on site. But basically, what we see really in category after category after category, is, this huge and accelerating demand interestingly, from both the sort of practitioners at the in the trenches and at the upper level of organizations, for different reasons, notably, right? But basically to say, yeah, hey, can you run this for me? Right? Can you take this piece, manage it? Because I've got better things to do with my time. To the comment at the top, I don't want to worry about this because I want to go out and write sort of code, for my own business, right? Or I'm the only one who can write that. There are a bunch of different people who can, sort of help manage, sort of this infrastructure. So, like I said, we see that category after category after category. I mean, pick a category, a technology industry category. It doesn't really make a difference, from operating systems, databases, everything in between, platform as a service, ish spaces, as we're talking about here. That's what we
definitely it.
But the conversations that you're having, what would you say, or how would you characterize the sort of appetite for, these cloud services, these third-party managed services?
Yeah, actually, to go off your point earlier, I asked a very similar question, right? Is it competitively advantageous for you to run your own platform, to run your own infrastructure, right? And getting the customer to think about that. Again, that's having a challenger mentality, right? And you're right. In most cases, it's not, right? There are organizations out there where it is, and we can support them too. But, kind of tongue in cheek, make a joke as part of, when I talk to customers, whatever, it's like, did you hear about that, Fortune 100 bank that on their earnings call, the CEO announces, we missed shipping our new product, we missed our numbers, but it's okay because we adopted open source Kubernetes and we're not locked into a cloud. That would never happen, right? And so, with that, we're seeing huge demand. I can't give specific numbers, but I mean, compared to where we were just a few months ago, 5x, in terms of what we're seeing in customers and actual clusters and cores, however you want to slice it, are of what we had from a few months ago are here wanting to do cloud services with Red Hat, right? They love the opinionated and prescriptive way to again build, deploy, and manage applications. They love, they want that software supply chain around the runtimes, which you get. So if you're building in Spring and Python and Quarkus and .NET Core and Node, we give you some safe bits. Those building blocks are super important. We abstract away your developers having to build their applications to containers. We provide prescriptive, opinionated CI/CD, which is critical to building configuring a software factory, right? Observability and service mesh, right? All these higher order level of abstractions, all managed by Red Hat, right? I mean, we're not actually managing your pipeline, but we're managing the engine for your pipeline, right? And they're I think a lot of our customers are realizing it. In fact, when you look at developers, right? You said we want to make developers want things to be boring, right? Our most productive and successful customers using OpenShift, this goes all the way back even to self-managed on-prem days, are the ones where the developers don't even know they're using OpenShift. They get pushing, and then that software factory just takes care of everything. Right. Well, now we can go a step further through cloud services, again, which is why we're seeing such a demand for it, that not only do developers not know that they're running on OpenShift, but your operations teams are not having to worry about the care and feeding of the cluster either as much. Don't worry, there's a little bit, right? As much, because our site reliability engineers on our side become a virtual extension of their team. That enables them to focus on higher order, more performant concepts and issues that may be affecting them, including, what we see too is, when a customer moves to Red Hat Cloud Services, they're already using something else in Amazon or Microsoft or Google. They already see the value of using like an RDS or an Azure Postgres, right? And they want to consume that through an opinionated software factory like what our cloud services provide, and they can, right? It allows them to focus again on building these applications. That goes back to that 9 to 5 innovation.
Yeah. So that's sort of Red Hat and the managed service side of things. What would you tell folks, what would your advice be, for organizations that are like planning for future infrastructure? And again, we as I said, we have a I don't know, bias is probably too strong a word, but we think in a lot of cases, in the majority of cases, in fact, managed services make sense. But when you're out talking to organizations, as you say, it makes sense for some of them, it doesn't for others. What's your advice? What would you tell folks who are planning for future?
Yeah, I think it starts a little bit with, are you willing to give up a little bit of flexibility to move faster, right? Because there's still a lot of, and I don't want to shade any customer I've spoken with. There's still a lot of folks out there who are control freaks that are kind of like locked into the past of having to turn every knob and pull every lever.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I remind them is like, if you were comfortable going to AWS and not picking out your cooling system and even your blade and your in the spinning disk silicon in there, then you're probably okay, again, giving up a little bit more choice to move faster, higher up the stack, right? So there's that part of it. Now, again, this goes back to what you were saying earlier, like, is it competitively advantageous to have full control? So if it is, then we have an option for you. That's our self-managed versions of the software, even though our stuff is very configurable, right? Even the cloud services are. Then once we determine that, like the comfortability of your mindset for adopting cloud services, we look at where is your data today? Like, are you doing all net new? Red Hat deals with greenfield customers, but we also have a ton of customers who are brownfield, right? And working with the customer to truly understand the importance of data locality, data sovereignty, data gravity, right, of where you need to be deployed. So it's kind of difficult if you have all your data on-prem and you're going to start deploying in Amazon. You got to really think about that connection. How can we minimize costs in doing so and minimize complexity, which will also be minimizing complexity. And then probably the big sphere around all of this is and this goes back to the first point I was making about comfortability of going to a hyperscaler like AWS, Amazon, AWS, Microsoft, or Google, is the cloud that you're betting on, or clouds that you're betting on, right? That will help guide the decision of which Red Hat cloud service that you should be going with, right? And because a lot of the customers you work with have made large commitments to the cloud providers, right? EDPs or committed spend programs on Amazon or Microsoft, respectively. And those large commitments give them increased buying power, but they have to retire it or else they have to true up in most cases. So the beauty of Red Hat Cloud Services, specifically, again, ROSA, which is Red Hat OpenShift Service on AWS, and Arrow, which is Azure Red Hat OpenShift, they're first-party services on those clouds so that you actually transact. You get one bill. You turn it on, you get one bill, and it's there. It retires your committed spend. You have to have no paper contract with Red Hat. It just works, right? And I really think that's been becoming more and more valuable to our customers in terms of like maximizing their existing investment. And if they want to maximize their existing investment, it's almost a no-brainer as our investment in cloud services. Hyperscalers. It's almost a no-brainer to go with Red Hat Cloud Services versus a self-managed offering.
Fair enough. And we're just about out of time. Is there anywhere you would point folks, who want to learn more about, everything I guess we've talked about today? Yeah,
red.ht/OpenShift Cloud Services, one big word, and we can definitely post that in there. The other thing is, go try it. Go to the Amazon console, go to your Azure console, spin it up. Another huge benefit of Red Hat Cloud Services is that you don't have to make a large commitment like you used to for a year. You can spin it up for an hour and then turn it down. I quip, it takes about 30 minutes to spin up a ROSA cluster, right? And I can do it as a senior leader at Red Hat. It's easy enough for even me, who isn't in the tech every day, to spin up a cluster and actually deploy apps to it, and then I can turn it off, right? So just visit that site that I mentioned earlier, and just give it a try, and really explore what it means to up-level yourself to build, deploy, manage applications rather than focusing on container and kube.
Makes sense to me. And with that, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks. I've been Steve O'Grady, and Chuck, I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely.
Cheers.